Mabuhay. I am Murray Heasley, a New Zealander with Māori blood, the indigenous people of New Zealand. And so I will preface these opening remarks with a traditional prayer or karakia that is often spoken at such gatherings to ensure harmony and mutual respect. Kia hora te mehino, kia whakapapapona te moana. He huarahi ma tātou I tō rangi nei, haro atu, haro mai, tātou I tātou kātou hui ei, tei ki ei, homi ei. May the seas be peaceful. May the ocean be as smooth as jade. On this path, we are on this day, love given and love received, to one and all, together as one in unity. Magandang umaga mga pinipinit Ginoo at mga kinarangalana panuhin. Maiyang buntag mga kinang ug mga Ginoo. Maligayang pagdating sa makasasayang summit na ito. Ang pagtrato ng isang bansa sa mga anak nito ang pinakamahalagang tungkulin na maaari nitong taglayin. Walang higit na layunin kaysa mahalin, pahalagahan, alagaan, protektahan ang mga inosenteng bata na ang buhay ay ipinagkatiwala sa ating pangangalaga. Nandito kami para maghanap ng mga solusyon para protektahan ang mga bata at para maintindihan ang issue. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and honored guests. Welcome to this historic summit. A nation's treatment of its children is the most important role it can have. There is no greater purpose than to love, cherish, nurture, and protect innocent children whose lives are entrusted to our care. We are here to search for solutions to protect children and to understand the issue. I have the honor to lead this summit as a board member of Ending Clergy Abuse. I'm married to Annalyn Kariat, a native of Liloi, Mindanao, who is my fellow coordinator for this event. I taught at UP in the Department of Arts and Letters, the University of the Philippines, in the Department of Arts and Letters in the early 2000s, and saw a great deal of the Philippines as an IELTS examiner, traveling from Tuguegarao in the Cagayan Valley to as far south as General Santos City, Manny Pacquiao's country. I did the University of the Philippines for the love and IELTS for the money. I worked as an advisor to Vice President Teofisto Quingona Jr. during his short term. I deeply love this country, and in a few weeks, will be in the warm embrace of many nephews and nieces in Dipolog as I celebrate my 74th birthday. So a deep concern for children is not merely a philosophical or theoretical, a human rights concern for me. It is bone deep and personal. I look at the deep innocence, purity of soul, hope and trust in the faces of the Jonkera Children's Choir, the choir that has introduced this summit as they sing their national anthem, to Panginiran, and their willingness to commit to a nation they see as a nurturing mother. They're willing to embrace an unwavering love and pride and give the essence of their being to serve. And my mind goes to the most famous Filipino of all and how his life epitomized the same hope. The iconic image of the University of the Philippines is the oblation statue, inspired by the final poem of the most famous Filipino of all time, Jose Rizal, put to death in his 35th year by order of the Spanish government and the machinations of the friars. It is the naked figure of a youthful man offering himself for the greater good of the nation, just as the children of the Junquera Children's Choir pledged to do. Rizal's experiences of the institutional church had destroyed his faith in it, and he saw it as a fundamental part of the oppression of society. Dominican, Franciscan, and Augustinian friars, in particular, held enormous power as major landowners and with political power at local and national level that was almost unprecedented on the planet. Rizal spoke of the, quote, shipwreck of his faith, unquote, as he turned to Freemasonry and a belief system that was centered on Kantian logic, a rejection of dogma, priests, and scripture, and a repeated and ceaseless call for personal intellectual freedom and inquiry, always wedded to the greater good and focused on the nurturing and encouragement of youth to always strive for excellence. In his novel, Noli Me Tangere, the two friars, Damaso and Sabi, are rapists, while in his second novel, El Filibusterismo, the indigenous priest, Father Florentino, is generous, kind-hearted, and encouraging of self-improvement. The latter a man to be emulated, but unfortunately, an exception. More like the indigenous secular priests Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora, cruelly murdered by horrific garroting or rotting in 1871 for mutiny. A street named after these three men runs next to this very building in the University of the Philippines Hotel. In a famous interchange of letters between the Jesuit superior Pastels and Rizal, on April the 4th, 1893, while in forced exile in Dalisay, Dapitan, expressed his deeply held belief that God was expressed in nature, not in churches, or books, or consecrated men. I quote Rizal, I believe in revelation, but not in revelation or revelations which each religion or religions claim to possess. Examining them impartially, comparing them and scrutinizing them, one cannot avoid discerning the human fingernail and the stamp of the time in which they were written. No, let us not make God in our image. Poor inhabitants that we are of a distant planet lost in infinite space. However brilliant and sublime our intelligence may be, it is scarcely more than a small spark which shines and in an instant is extinguished, and it alone can give us no idea of that blaze, that conflagration, that ocean of light. I believe in revelation, but in that living revelation which surrounds us in every side, and that voice mighty, eternal, unceasing, incorruptible, clear, distinct, and the revelation which speaks to us and penetrates us from the moment we are born until we die. His eternity, his glory, his wisdom. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Unquote. Now, the school that Rizal built in his enforced exile in Talisay, Dapitan, encouraged intellectual excellence, creativity, critical and problem-solving thinking, and independence of thought tempered by social responsibility, and a central concern for the greater good of society and the betterment of humankind. It was visionary, authentic, and a blueprint for the future, centered on youth as the hope of the nation. Now, The Catholic Church in the Philippines has a rich and deservedly celebrated recent history of championing human rights and democratic freedoms. Its role under Cardinal Sin in the overthrow of the Marcos dictatorship and the EDSA revolution of 1986 was critical in ushering in the Aquino presidency, a year in which the Philippines shone like a beacon on the international stage and applauded for its courage and bloodless affirmation of democracy and justice. It was a moment of extreme optimism and unbridled hope and joy. In similar fashion, many church leaders have exposed the extrajudicial killings, the enforced disappearances, the illegal detention of dissidents and human rights activists detained under false charges, and systematic human rights abuses. Bishop Gerardo Alminaza of the Diocese of San Carlos Negros Occidental is an example of such a man, being part of the Duterte Panagutin network, supporting the House of Representatives Quad Committee recommendation of charges against the former president and his associates before the International Criminal Court in The Hague. The network includes numerous Catholic clergy, priests and nuns, human rights advocates, in full support of such progressive rights groups as Bayan and Karapatan. Panagutin means to take responsibility, and its natural corollary is panangutan, or accountability. It is deeply and tragically ironic then that this same institution, championing and defending human rights, has failed to defend and protect the most innocent human rights of all, that of defenseless and trusting children, betraying in ghastly and horrific fashion the very core of Christ's demand of humanity, and doing that in every corner of the globe, in every culture, in every language spoken. Although this disconnect might seem odd, anomalous, W. Edwards Denning, the statistician and management guru who helped Japan achieve its amazing post-World War II recovery, said that, and I quote, "A system cannot understand itself," unquote. A principle based in turn on an earlier formation by Kurt Gödel that proved a system cannot demonstrate its own consistency. The fundamental truth that underpins these observations is the core principle of natural justice, that a party cannot be a judge in its own cause. It is solipsistic inanity and a form of malignant narcissism with catastrophic consequences for the general good. Now, in 1985, 40 years ago, just a year before the EDSA revolution of 1986, the violent and remorseless sexual violation of children by the priest Father Gilbert Galty of Lafayette, Louisiana, became a kind of ground zero in the abuse scandal that has since rocked and continues to rock the foundations of the institutional church. 3 men wrote a 93-page report and presented it to the US bishops, warning of the impending catastrophe should this issue not be dealt. Reverend Thomas P. Doyle, then a canon lawyer for the Vatican Embassy in Washington, Ray Mouton, a lawyer defending Galti, and Michael R. Peterson, a psychiatrist, predicted that the scandal would cost the church $1 billion and said pedophilia was, quote, "a lifelong disease with no hope at this point in time for cure." End of quote. At trial, it emerged that his superiors had known about Galti's problem, secured inadequate treatment for him, kept reassigning him despite reasons to believe he was still a great danger, and made confidential payments to the victims. The institutional reaction and playbook, repeated ever since on every continent and every language, was set: deny, refrain, minimize, protect reputation and assets, move predators, intimidate, or bribe victims. The Orwellian tropes of children being the seducers, an evil and vindictive press, the behavior itself being merely a reflection of sinful humanity thrown out of paradise by Eve's misleading Adam, all these became standard fundamental fare, the global playbook for this institution, rather than dealing honestly, openly, and transparently with the disease that went to its very core. Pope Benedict added a theological cherry on top with the notion of moral relativism and the rejection of an absolute truth being the culprit, an infection and disease of secularism, self-indulgence, and self-obsessive egoism disconnected from the greater good. Pope John Paul II framed it all as an American problem. He could not have been further from the truth, as the very existence of ECHA proves, with every part of the globe represented, an equally horrific abuse in Poland, France, Spain, and the rest of Europe, Latin America, Africa, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific. As it turns out, as of today, the abuse has cost the Catholic Church in the US alone more than $7 billion, and far more significantly, has revealed staggering numbers of victims whose lives have been shattered and suffering pain so intense that has been described by the psychiatrist Leslie Lothstein as, quote, soul murder, unquote. When truth has been tested in civil courts, it is the institution that has been found wanting, not the victims. The greatest spokesperson in the modern age for truth in relationship to the Catholic Church was Richard Sipe, one of my mentors, like Tom Doyle. Richard passed away in 2018. Richard wrote in his poem, At My Graveside, I quote, truth alone will honor what I have been or done. End of quote. One truth is that the current scandal is not a modern day scandal, but one that goes back to the earliest days of the Catholic Church and its later medieval form, as revealed in Diane Elliott's The Corrupter of Boys, Sodomy, Scandal, and the Medieval Clergy. It is not a crisis. It is a bedrock, persistent reality over 2,000 years in the making. Of the many official investigations in multiple countries and cultures into the truth of how deep and alarming the issue of sexual abuse of children inside the Catholic Church is, the accepted gold standard of investigations is the 2012 to 2017 Australian Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sex Abuse, that produced 57 case studies and 61 reports, finding that 7% of diocesan priests, 14% of religious priests, Society of Mary, etc., 22% of Christian brothers, 24% of Marist brothers, and 42% of St. John of God brothers were guilty of child sex abuse, as were 29% of all lay members with access to children, and 5% of nuns. In New Zealand, in its Abuse in Care Royal Commission that followed the Australian Royal Commission from 2018 to 2024, the number of diocesan priests accused of sex offences against children was twice as high as Australia at 14%. And these figures came from the Catholic Church itself, its representatives. Michael Cito, the forensic and clinical psychologist at the Faculty of Medicine, University of Ottawa, has written what is considered the most authoritative and peer-reviewed commentary on the issue. It's called Pedophilia and Sexual Offending Against Children: Theory, Assessment, and Intervention, with a 2018 update of the edition. In his opinion, based on the data reviewed, pedophiles in the general population represent 1% of normative society, making the Catholic Church in some instances over 42 times more dangerous to children. Why is this so? How has this played out in the Philippines? And what may be done in the future to protect and safeguard children is the focus of this summit. How dangerous are these pedophiles and pederasts to children? Dr. Fred Berlin, founder of the Johns Hopkins Sexual Disorders Clinic, who specializes in the evaluation and treatment of patients with sexual disorders, has stated that these men have 40 times the sexual compulsion to molest children than men and women in normative society with age-appropriate partners. That's how dangerous they are and motivated they are to groom and sexually molest their children. Now, I was told when the summit was first suggested that the effort would be futile. The cultural impediments and roadblocks would be impenetrable. The institutional church, too powerful and oppositional. The faithful, too passive, accepting, and meek, and that nothing would change. I just looked at Ireland and know for a certainty this is not true. Tom Inglis, in his Moral Monopoly, Rise and Fall of the Catholic Church in Modern Ireland, traces how the seemingly unbreachable power of the Catholic Church could evaporate once brought to account. Or Fintan O'Toole's We Don't Know Ourselves, that describes the total transformation of Irish life in his single lifetime from 1948 to the present, and the complete collapse of Irish Catholic trust in the church, largely as a result of the criminal abuse of children. The Catholic Church in the Philippines faces equal collapse should it not change for the better, and should it not change for the better and put children at its very center. There is no inevitability but change. None of us here in this room are the same as when we entered. We just lack the consciousness to accept it, just as our Earth spins at 1,670 kilometers an hour and we feel stationary. In June of 2024, at a 3-day colloquium hosted at the Institute of Anthropology at Gregorian University in Rome, ECA put forward a revised zero-tolerance canon law, 1395, crafted by the canon law experts Tom Doyle and Jim Connell, and argued in a position paper by the filmmakers and advocates Sarah Pearson and Peter Heasley, with critical input from Anne Barrett Doyle of Bishop's Accountability and James Egan. Central to this revised canon was the responsibility and accountability of any church functionary covering up the crime, and total transparency, enabling victims and their families access to the process unencumbered by any statutes of limitation of secrecy. One section reads, quote, "Moreover, any bishop, priest, deacon, or a man or a woman who is a member of an institute of consecrated life or a society of apostolic life or a church lay employee or a church volunteer who covers up crimes of sexual abuse that is admitted or is established after an appropriate process in accordance with canon law shall be removed permanently from all ecclesiastical ministry and from the clerical state, from religious life, from church lay employment, or from church voluntary activity," unquote. I encourage everyone here to read the entire canon and the position paper written by Sarah Pearson, James Egan, and Peter Heasley that contextualizes it. It speaks to transparency, accountability, openness, inclusiveness, of fidelity to vos estis lux mundi. You are the light of the world, the light to healing, justice, transformative behavior with the people of God at its center, of children and their fundamental rights. On the flight across here from New Zealand, I happened to view the movie Conclave, centered on the and it centered on the selection of a new pope. In the movie, the actor Stanley Tucci, playing the role of Cardinal Bellini, revealed to the actor Ralph Fiennes, playing the Cardinal Dean, that the Pope had doubts towards the end. The astonished Dean reacted, "The Pope had doubts about God?" To which the Cardinal replied, "No, never about God, about the church."